All right, President Obama's new budget calls for spending cuts, a freeze on some programs, and large deficits for both the short term and the long term. Joining us now is Bloomberg News columnist Kevin Hassett. He's the director of economic policy at the American Enterprise Institute, and he's also been an economist at the Fed, and he was an advisor to both the Bush and McCain presidential campaigns. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Let's talk first about the president's proposed cuts. $1.1 trillion in savings over the next 10 years, so about $100 billion a year on average. A lot of it is a spending freeze at these levels now, which already are boosted levels because of the emergency stimulus spending we've been doing. How much of a cut really is that?
Yeah, there's not really much cut at all. He's not very serious in this budget. And I think that really for me, the headline of this budget is that Obama thinks that he can have a big spending showdown with Republicans and win the PR battle over that. And so sure, spending is going down something like $1 trillion over 10 years. But don't forget that just before Obama took office, the government was spending about $2.9 trillion. Now it's up to $3.7. And so if you freeze anything, then you're just locking in the big government gains. And that's really what this budget's about.
Yeah, talk to us a little bit about baseline budgeting, because a lot of people at home, if they freeze their spending at this level, they don't feel like that's a cut in spending, but for Washington, that is.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, the basic idea is if we spend money last year, then it more or less goes into the budget. We can spend it for free forever. So we could have a baseline where we're spending more and more every year, and then if we spend a little bit less more, then it looks like a cut. And that's kind of what's happening. Certainly if you go back and look at what the CBO thought we'd be doing 10 years from now, a couple years ago, and compare it to what CBO is looking ahead to now, or OMB, then you're seeing massive spending increases. And so this is really a big government budget. I think it's kind of reckless, and I think what it's going to do is it's going to create a really nasty response from Republicans, and it's going to make this whole continuing resolution and debt limit struggle of the next few months much more dramatic, I think.
Although the Republican side could be considered reckless as well, Kevin. I mean, they ran talking about big cuts in entitlement spending, which is obviously the huge or the biggest driver for deficits, and they're doing nothing to touch that either. Where are the Tea Party Republicans here?
Well, we don't really know yet exactly how that's going to work out. I'm hearing that the near-term cuts that they're going to be looking at are going to be bigger than I expected in my Bloomberg column a few weeks ago. And so it's definitely the case that the new Tea Party people want big cuts, and that the seasoned hands are a little bit wary about being too ambitious about that, and they're working it out right now. But what Obama's done is he could have gone a little bit in the direction of Boehner, but he went in the opposite direction. In the near term, spending's actually higher than the latest CBO baseline. And so I think that makes the showdown much more likely and much more dramatic.
But hang on, Paul Ryan came out with cuts that I think were only about $60 billion. He factors that out at $100 billion over the whole year because it obviously doesn't cover the whole calendar year. Still, doesn't that seem measly? I mean, compared to what we heard in campaign talk, you would have thought they'd take a chunk out of Social Security spending and growth, a chunk out of health care spending growth, a chunk out of Medicare spending growth, and they don't seem to have the, let's say, courage to wade into those waters.
Yeah, and in fact, if you look, the president's own commission said we need to cut $4 trillion out of the budget in order to get to a place that's more sustainable. And so we came in way, way below that number. And so, yeah, I think you're right that we're pushing off the hard problems for the future right now. We're continuing to do that.
Let's talk for a second about tax treatment here, because the CBO projections are always a little bit mushy. You had an excellent column yesterday, I believe, about tax treatment for cuts. We saw some cuts, but the president's new budget envisions tax increases as well.
Yeah, that's right, because there's going to be the expiration of these tax holidays that we're doing for one more year to try and get the economy going again. And so down the road, tax revenue is going up. And there's also a built-in tax hike, which happens because if the economy grows, then more and more people get kicked into higher brackets. And so if you look at the budget forecast, the revenue relative to GDP by the end of the outlook is sort of higher than we've seen in the past. And so it's not, the deficit's not there because the taxes are too low. The deficit's there because the spending is so humongous. And the reason the spending is so large is that we just jacked it up with the big Keynesian stimulus, and Obama's freeze is locking that in.
But Kevin, is it safe to assume that raising taxes means raising revenue?
Not if you raise tax rates, but sometimes the corporate taxes. This is what my Bloomberg column today. You could go to the terminal or the website and see it. I talk about the evidence that countries that lower their corporate tax rate get more tax revenue. That's the old Laffer curve. I think that's about the only space in tax land where that works. Most of the time, if you have a higher tax rate, you get at least a little bit more revenue, and that's where Obama's getting his revenue. He's increasing taxes on income and wages and so on as we go out into the budget outlook.
All right. Hey, Kevin, thanks for joining us. AEI's Director of Economic Policy there, Kevin Hassett. Check out Bloomberg.com for his column.